for the opportunity to present Senate Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 1586. About a year ago, I was contacted by a constituent by the name of Jim Roberts. He shared a devastating story about how he purchased 20 acres of land in Franklin County in pursuit of a dream. He had imagined the land would serve as the perfect place to build a life, start a farm, and raise a family. A dream that came crashing down around him one day as he was walking his property and found a strange orangish goo seeping out of the ground beneath one of his property's creeks. It was then he began to search for answers. Through a sunshine request, eventually led him to the discovery that his new home was located adjacent to the old abandoned Generally landfill in St. Clair, a toxic environmental disaster that had been sitting unaddressed for decades. You see, once upon a time, a previous owner of the site had operated this landfill illegally for years before fleeing the country. The site was left uncapped, unclosed, and to this day continues to leak leachate and other toxic materials into nearby properties and streams, including watershed into the Merrimack River. It's important to point out that this isn't just a problem affecting one local community. Due to the poisoning of nearby rivers and streams, this environmental disaster is much more widespread and impacting a larger region, the full extent of which is unknown even to this day. And unfortunately, it gets worse. There are 28 other similar sites scattered throughout the state of Missouri, as you can see on the map that was distributed. It also includes the name and the name of the corresponding state rep and senator whose district contains one of these sites. These sites are catastrophic nightmares that serve as a tremendous liability to our state, a liability that only becomes more damaging and more expensive to resolve with each passing year. If there's one thing we should all agree on, it's that Missourians deserve clean water, rivers, and streams. So what led us to this point? How could 29 abandoned landfills go addressed and largely unnoticed for decades? Why, for the better part of last year, was I and my constituent, Jim Roberts, constantly pointed in circles by multiple levels of government, multiple agencies, while unable to obtain any answers. In December, acclaimed environmental activist Erin Brockovich summed it up pretty well in a report she published on this very same landfill. In her report, she states, and I quote, "This mess is what happens when we build a regulatory system designed not to solve problems, but to avoid responsibility for them. We create overlapping authorities with conflicting mandates, ensuring that when something goes wrong, everyone can point at someone else. We pass sweeping environmental laws, then systematically defund and hamstring the agencies tasked with enforcing them. Missouri DNR is understaffed and underfunded by its own admission, but that's a political choice, not an inevitable one." End quote. County governments are unable to bear the cost of even the initial environmental study to survey the extent of the problem, much less afford the cost of full cleanup of the site. At the state level, the Department of Natural Resources is also handcuffed and largely unable to assist. The reasons for this are actually twofold. One, they lack the necessary statutory authority to address abandoned landfills. All statutory authority that is granted to the department for the purpose of addressing solid waste disposal sites is tied to the owner. The department has the ability to identify, investigate, and prosecute owners of sites disposing of waste illegally, though when these statutes were originally created, I don't think they could have foreseen a situation like we have today with 29 of these ownerless sites scattered across the state. Number two is lack of funding to address the problem. Senate Bill 1586 addresses both of these issues. Now, step one is pretty straightforward. This bill grants DNR the statutory authority to assess, investigate, test, remediate, and manage abandoned solid waste disposal areas. Step two, it addresses the funding. Currently, there are 20 solid waste management districts that serve as an intermediary between DNR and the city's, counties, recycling programs, and other recipients of grants aimed at waste diversion. At the time this system was implemented, there were 77 active landfills across our state. Present day, there are 17. Waste districts consume 61% of all tipping fees collected statewide, which is actually up from the percent of tipping fees they received when first implemented. Present day, this accounts for approximately $8.5 million a year. 50% of that $8.5 million is consumed on just the overhead to keep the waste districts going. Though I will note that the amount of overhead can vary a decent amount from district to district. This means right off the bat, the state is losing well over $4 million a year that could be utilized to both allocate more funds for these environmental programs while also leaving several $1 million a year to put towards the process of conducting environmental studies and cleaning up our state's 29 abandoned landfills. Now, I will say I've had the opportunity to speak with several people who operate these districts, and based on my conversations, many of them seem like just all-around good people who I believe are truly seeking to make a positive impact in their communities. That being said, we also cannot overlook the countless instances of waste and abuse deeply embedded throughout the solid waste district system as a whole. Examples have ranged from misuse of funds for personal gain to excessive spending on office artwork and decorative books to the tune of six figures. One example that stood out was an instance in which a director utilized a grant to fund a no-bid, contractless lease of an office building he also owned, seemingly utilizing grant funds intended for waste mitigation to benefit himself personally. I've gone through audits and reports dating back to the early 2000s, and unfortunately, examples of waste and this sort of abuse are far too widespread throughout the current system. This bill would essentially cut out the middleman and streamline the grant process directly through the department, which already administers over $1 billion in grants every year to municipalities, counties, and local environmental organizations, thus eliminating the $4+ million lost in overhead and providing our state with the necessary funds needed to address these environmental nightmares. Now, in the time since filing the original version of this bill, I've actively sought out input from various stakeholders and have had numerous conversations with organizations who are currently the beneficiaries of the grants administered by the solid waste management districts. Even though the bill as originally filed did absolutely nothing to eliminate a single dollar of funding for any of these organizations, there were concerns expressed that they were just not confident that the continuation of those funds was necessarily guaranteed either. Based on this feedback, I drafted the sub that I am presenting today, which I believe will not only guarantee that the current level of funding continues, it would in most scenarios result in an increase. So as stated before, under current law, waste management districts receive 61% of all tipping fees, approximately $8.5 million. Since oversight is somewhat limited in whether and how much each waste district reports to the department varies, we have no way of knowing exactly what the actual percentage of our statewide tipping fees is that actually makes it to the end grant recipient. In order to generate an accounting for this and ensure there is no loss of grant funding for these purposes, I added the following language. And if you'd like, you can follow along at the bottom of page 7, section 1. The department shall allocate a percentage of revenue dedicated to grants previously managed by the solid waste management districts. This percentage shall serve as a minimum percentage of revenue to which such grants shall be percentage of revenue to fund such grants and shall be calculated as follows. The total grant amount previously administered by all solid waste management districts for the previous 3 fiscal years divided by the total amount of solid waste tonnage fees from the previous 3 fiscal years. This allows us to use a 3-year sample size to determine the actual amount that has been awarded by solid waste districts annually. It takes that data, and it doesn't simply preserve that same level of funding going forward. I went even further and established that as the absolute minimum the department must allocate solely for the funding of the grants and programs formerly funded by the waste districts. The other primary concerns expressed were regarding potential changes to the local distribution of funds, how it impacted local control of those funds, and simply the loss of a salary by someone who may be currently directly employed by one of the districts. I attempted to address these concerns in the sub as well. There was a portion of statute pertaining to how funds would be distributed locally to each solid waste district, which was originally removed along with other statutory references to the districts. I reinstated the local distribution language, simply replacing the geographic boundary of each district with the geographic boundary of each of the department's 6 regional office territories. Just as before, it would distribute funds according to the same formula under current law. 40% will continue to be allocated based on population, while 60% will be allocated based on the amount of revenue generated within each geographical area. As far as who will be controlling the funds, aka whether it would retain quote-unquote local control, grants would be awarded directly to municipalities, counties, local environmental groups, and regional planning commissions, directly allowing them to retain control over how those funds would be utilized. To the argument that someone might lose a salary if the solid waste districts are dissolved, I'll make the same argument I made to my own county commissioner after a meeting I had with them just last week alongside their solid waste management district director for that region. And this is a woman who I wholeheartedly believe is one of the good actors within this system. She was passionate, experienced, and had a track record managing recycling and other programs within the county that was truly an asset. I looked at him and said, if you're not willing to take advantage of the opportunity to utilize these same grant funds to hire this woman on and allow her to continue this work directly for the county, you must be crazy. In other words, if there's a person or people who are doing good work, making substantial contributions to their community and local environment, there is absolutely no reason why that work should be discontinued simply because a waste district was dissolved. They may be doing the same work under a different banner, such as working for a city, county, or other organization, but we want these good actors in this system to continue their work, regardless if it's through a waste district or another entity. Despite all this, I am willing to bet there are several people sitting behind me that are lined up to testify against this bill, and believe me, I get it. I get it. Change is scary. But what is more frightening is what happens if we continue to do nothing as this problem continues to worsen with every passing year. We are facing an epic systematic failure of our government to address this issue going back decades. Systematic problems of this scale often require significant systematic changes in order to reverse course. We can get there. It's not too late. But the time to act is now. So it is my hope that the committee joins me in support of Senate Bill 1586 for our children, for our future, and to preserve all the nature and beauty that this great state has to offer. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator. Does anybody have any questions?